Hi, Rachel. Another
Hi,
really
Kelly.
exciting evening. Trying to get this live business going. Unfortunately, it's a Zoom issue, and if they don't get it sorted out soon, I think I will be taking my business elsewhere because it is very frustrating. So,
Yes, no, I had a few Zoom gremlins this afternoon, and it is frustrating. Um, I mean, the technology is great because it enables us to sit here at opposite ends of carpeting and have a conversation.
yeah.
But at the same time, yeah, it's a source of huge frustration when it doesn't go the way that you expect.
And
Yeah.
what I don't understand is how it has a life of its own, really. You would think that this goes wrong, so we need to do this. But that's not the case.
No.
It's not the case at all. It's like,
Yeah. It's the interconnectedness of all of our devices and our platforms, and I just spent the last few months wrangling my way through that myself, and so I totally get your world.
anyway, we're
We're
here
here, we're
for
here, and we're going to have this amazing conversation about ADHD and
and thank you for anyone who is actually watching this recording. And we might have some people jumping in during the recording because we've just posted up the invitation in case people actually want to come in live and ask questions, which would be great.
brilliant.
Tonight, Rachel, it's lovely to have you here again. And for those who haven't been introduced to Rachel yet, Rachel is a fabulous Davis facilitator working with both neurodivergent children and adults, and has been doing some amazing work with a lot of people. And part of her remit, or part of the Davis program, is working with ADHD. And the next couple of lives or recordings that we're going to be doing will be about ADHD, living well with ADHD. Now, Rachel, a lot of us, certainly me, I was diagnosed dyslexic as a young person, which is really unusual because I'm quite old, and in those days, it was very rare for anybody to even recognize that somebody was dyslexic. But I was very typically dyslexic, highly intelligent, but at the age of 11, having a reading age of 7. And that was because I was being taught through phonics, and that just did not compute at all. But, but I was never diagnosed as ADHD, or nobody ever really indicated that I was ADHD, because I was always quite a gregarious, sort of laid back personality. But as I've gotten older, and as I've been able to stand back and watch myself, and as I've learned more about neurodivergence, I've realized that I have a good dose of ADHD inattentive in me. Just in the various little quirks and things that how I operate in life, which can be a challenge, but also can be an absolute blessing as well. So I think it would be a really good place to start if you could tell us what ADHD looks like, because it's no longer ADD and ADHD. Oh, we've got somebody coming in, so that's lovely.
Wonderful.
It's no longer ADD and ADHD. It's now ADHD inattentive, isn't it? Yes. So when you're dealing with somebody who's got ADHD, what does that look like?
Well, so first of all, welcome, Joanne. Welcome for joining us on our reconstituted live, which isn't quite a live. It is live. We're live. Good to see you.
It's
Yeah.
alive,
anyway,
but it's not live.
yeah, one of our joys of tech.
Yes.
So so ADHD is its official term is attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder.
Yeah.
And I guess for a long time, people have been trying to distinguish between those of us who have the hyperactivity aspect of it and those of us who don't. And that's why there was that distinction between ADD and ADHD. But at the heart of all of them is the issue of attention.
Yes.
And often children are labelled as inattentive in school. But often it's not that they're inattentive, it's like they've got their attention on something else,
Yes.
right? And to the frustration and often chagrin of teachers, their attention is not necessarily on what the teacher wants them to have their attention on. Maybe it's the blackboard or the front of the room or what the teacher is saying or the task at hand. But the young person's attention has drifted off, wandered off, or got absorbed in something else. And I'll talk a little bit about the Davis organisation that I'm a facilitator with and their perspective on that in a moment. But fundamentally, if you have an attention challenge, it's usually that you have so much attention and it's spread everywhere.
Absolutely. There's no filter.
There's not much of a filter, and it's spread in many various ways. And there's things that come in and take it away from the here and now. And that can be for a lot of different causes, and we can talk a little bit about that tonight. But the main thing is it's an issue of attention. And, you know, I'm not a fan of labels. They're helpful to have someone have a diagnosis and then be able to have that issue addressed. And I think for me, personally, that's the beginning and end of the usefulness of a diagnosis. To have a label doesn't necessarily help a person unless it means that people can make some accommodations for the way that they interact in the world and the way that they learn, or that it gives them access to remedies and strategies and tools to be more effective at the things that are important for them in life. To me, that's the usefulness of a diagnosis and a so-called label. And I do not see that it as a disorder. And this might fly in the face of a lot of assessors and educators out there, but it's not a disorder. It's just a different way of attention being managed.
Different perspective, isn't it?
It's a different perspective. It's a different energy level, but it's particularly, it's a different brain pattern. And if we can talk about it from the perspective of difference instead of deficit or disorder or a failing or something like that, instead of saying, Johnny fails to pay attention at school, it could be Johnny has his attention on many different things in the class, and let's find some strategies to help him when he needs to focus on a particular task to do so, and when he's not needed to do that, he can freewheel and do something else, usually creative. And I think also, and I don't mean this in a bad way about teachers. I mean, I've been an adult educator most of my life, and I know the challenges of having a group of people in front of you and trying to maintain their attention for 10 minutes, let alone 40, 60
exactly.
or longer.
That helps. Yes.
But often the way that our education is delivered doesn't really grab people's attention. And for those of us with busy and active minds, as you often have when you have ADHD, it's quite frankly, it's boring. And so they go and look for other things, for forms of entertainment, or that's more interesting. And that is the challenge we have in education, isn't it? Is how to have the education space be inspiring and interesting and challenging for all types of learners that you've got in your room, And I think we were talking last week in our conversation about dyslexia, is you've got people with different ways of learning in front of you. And we talk a lot about that in the adult education space, you know, and the different profiles, like the VARC profile, which acknowledges that some people are visual learners, some are kinesthetic, some are auditory. And I don't think there's enough. And again, I don't want to speak out of turn because I'm not a primary teacher, I'm not a secondary teacher, but there's not enough acknowledgement in those spaces that you've got children coming in with different learning styles, different brain wiring.
Absolutely. And it's a systemic thing. It's not necessarily
it's not a teacher-based issue, but it shows up in the classroom. And so you've got this broad range of kids in front of you who think in different ways and learn in different ways. And how do you deliver education to them that makes the best of those traits?
Yes, absolutely.
And minimises, you know, the rough patches there.
So, and this is quite a good segue into what Davis, how Davis perceives ADHD and dyslexia and autism, for that matter. Last time we were speaking about orientation. So how does this relate?
So the Davis perspective is that pretty much all the neurodiversities, when there's an issue, what's at play is a phenomenon called disorientation. And so when we all disorientate as humans, regardless of how our brains are wired, and it just is about degrees. So classic example of is, you know, if you're ever on a merry-go-round and you step off suddenly and it feels like the world is spinning and you feel ill and you want to vomit and things like that, that is an extreme version of disorientation, right? Some kids love it. Most of us
are really good at disorientating. And
and so when you have a neurodiverse brain or a tendency towards neurodiversity, that disorientation can show up in different ways. So with dyslexia, it can be a momentary disorientation over a word or a phrase or a page of text. And momentarily, that person can disorientate, and what they're seeing is not, with their brain, is not accurate to what's on the page, right? So they might misinterpret, like the word home and put house, or they might mix up a B or a D in a word, or they might zone out and not be able to read or not be able to interpret what they're reading well. Or when they go to write, there's a lot of disorientation happening, and so they can't produce the letters on the page, or they can't produce a page of text. So that's like classic. Welcome, Lynette. So that's classic reading, writing disorientation in dyslexia. With ADHD, often those disorientations are longer and they're triggered by different things. So with dyslexia, it's usually triggered by something to do with two-dimensional symbols. So text or numerals or musical symbols. I've come across people who disorientate reading music, fabulous musicians, can't read music.
So this is a question for you. You know, I've been diagnosed with Irlen syndrome, which is a visual perception problem. But actually, when I use my Davis techniques, the Irlen's doesn't exist. So it's a visual, it's obviously a visual processing thing, but it's a disorientation. So when I read 2D text, the text floats and moves.
So you're in that moment, you're disorienting.
But if I use my techniques that I was given during my Davis program, all of a sudden everything settles and I can read perfectly.
Because when we're oriented, then our brain is seeing the world as it really is, rather than through filters, if you like, or the disorientation effect, right? So you talked about your Erlands,
Yeah.
and I do know of Davis clients who had special lenses that they'd purchased for their Erlands who no longer needed them after their Davis program because their perception, their visual perception, not their eyesight, but their visual perception was corrected, right?
Absolutely.
Which is great, right?
Yeah. That was my experience.
Yeah. And then for me, so in my early 50s, when I did my Davis training, I discovered I was both ADHD and dyspraxic. And dyspraxia is the clumsy version of neurodiversity. So I spent my early years being told as a 5'10", built for basketball kid, you surely can catch something. And I couldn't catch a ball, whether it was a really hard little cricket ball or a great big basketball or netball. I was the D reserve on the netball team in South Canterbury. And I was just like nobody in school because it was a real sports crazy school. And it wasn't until I took lessons to learn to swim and to play the piano that I experienced some satisfaction outside of academia. And I did a lot of activities that really probably helped my brain because they helped with that left-right brain integration, doing the crawl and the hands crossing over with piano. And so they were good activities. We didn't know why I was learning them, but if I look back, that was a smart thing to do. But I missed out on the whole joy of being part of a team and, all of that. So it's one of the areas I love working with is when I have a young child or a young person, usually, who is dyspraxic, to help them correct it's a depth perception, it's a perception about the speed of things coming at you, and about coordinating your body in time and space. It's a whole thing, and we do some really simple tools, but are really powerful tools that has people be able to balance accurately, stand on one leg, catch a ball, throw a ball, get on a scooter, often for the first time, get on their bike. It's the coolest thing to take a non-bike rider to the stage where they can get on a bike and join in those activities. So that's dyspraxia. Now, ADHD, the disorientation can be triggered by so many different things. It can be triggered by imagination. So a thought. We often talk about a thought bubble or a thought disorientation, and we have them all the time. And I used to have them driving. I'd be driving, say, to Wanganui, and I'd have this thought disorientation about whatever, and I'd miss the turnoff.
Or think, how the hell did I get here?
Oh, exactly. And it can be triggered by many different things. It can be triggered by emotions. It can be triggered by something coming across your visual field. I mean, all of these devices are terribly distracting. So we try and minimize them when we're trying to do something focused. But it can, it can be
all your senses, basically, isn't it?
Any one of your senses can trigger. And with ADHD, the disorientations can be long term. Like literally, I could go for an hour and then realize I've missed my turn off, deep in some thought about something. Deep in an emotion about something, or deep in a fascination about something. I was the kid who would get lost in books. I loved reading as a kid. And then my mother would say, "Where have you been?" And I'd go, "Oh, I've been, over on the plains of Mississippi, reading a book." Like I literally would be transported. And so I often have parents come to me and go, "Our child will not pay attention in school, but will hyper-focus on Minecraft. What's with that?" And they are disorienting into the world of Minecraft. And it's very compelling. And sadly, all those games are designed to draw the mind in, draw the person in, and keep them there for as long as possible, because that's how they run their business.
Absolutely.
And there's a whole conversation we won't get into tonight about the ethics of designing your products to do that to people. There's a great book out there.
Yeah, especially neurodivergent people. I mean, like my son, he's definitely neurodivergent, ADHD, And you know, a lot of people think that if you have ADHD, you're a hyper person, and that is so not true. It's got nothing to do, well, for some people it has got to do with
Yeah,
hyperactivity, but
yeah,
what it is not being able to have the focus. I mean, even
yeah,
like now, I started talking about one thing and ended up talking about another
yeah.
thing.
We're kind of a bit famous for that. Is my friends talk about, did you take us to Paris in that conversation? I went, probably, because there is that sort of chain reaction effect in a
Yes,
conversation.
yes.
But I think there's a book which I don't give or recommend to some of my clients because it could give people a reason not to learn to focus, but it's called Stolen Focus.
Mhm.
And it's a really interesting expose into how across society, not just with people who are neurodivergent, but across society, our attention has been taken away by so many different factors, a lot of it in the IT space and the social media space, and just the pace of life. And it was quite a sobering. I didn't read it, actually. I listened to it, which says something as well. But I listened to it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is not just me. This is all pervasive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And
And
so, yeah, so the tools that I work with people with ADHD are about trying to rein in their attention so that they can put it on the things that matter to them and the people in their lives. So their teachers, if it's young people, teachers and parents, as well as coaches. But learning to regulate their attention and regulate their energy. So you talked about the hyperactivity, and I don't know that I would have been described as hyperactive, but I was always an active kid. I was always out on my bike. I grew up on a farm, so we had lots of opportunity for activity. And as a teenager, I finally found a few sports to play, but I was always cycling everywhere and I was on the go. And they often say people with ADHD live two lives because we seem to like to be involved in lots of things and have lots of activities going on. And, my life today is still a reflection of that. I've got my work with Davis, then there's other commitments that I have in the world, and they all absorb quite a bit of my attention and time. And people go, would you give up any of it? And I go, not really. It'd be like asking someone to give up a child. It's like, I love what I do.
yeah,
And then when the challenge, I think, as a maturing person with ADHD is how to have that balance in life between, nurturing yourself and replenishing yourself and fulfilling the things that are really important to you. Because I think we're all conscious we have the time we have, and so how do we make the best use of that time, but balancing downtime.
And that's the hyper attentive stuff that goes on.
Yes.
And I'm the same. I find that I will sit down. Well, first of all, it takes me a while to actually get into sitting down and doing what I'm supposed to do. But when I'm in it, you can't get me out of it. Before
Yes.
I know it, I'll look at it. Oh my giddy aunt, it's 5 o'clock. Where did that day go?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I've
So
just been absolutely focused on doing what I'm doing.
when you're in that sort of creative zone, I talk about being in the zone, and there's, I have to say, there's not much better place to be.
No.
Because you've got so much of your brain is dedicated to what you're creating or what you're working on, and I'm a gardener by hobby, and I can be out in my garden for hours just totally absorbed in what I'm doing, talking to the plants, pruning, whatever. And I can forget to eat, and it's usually only the call of nature that has me come inside and go, oh my gosh, it's been 6 hours and I haven't eaten anything. But and there's a world that I'm inhabiting in my brain, also because I'm gardening with my body, but it's incredibly satisfying.
Yes.
And I can understand why people who get into things like, programming games or programming, educational software, whatever, or painting, all the arts. You're just totally in the zone,
Yes.
creating, and nothing else exists.
Neither does time.
And time doesn't exist. And that's the pull of that I call it, that's the constructive disorientation, right? That's the positive disorientation. The downside is that people sometimes neglect their well-being. You know, so we know of so many famous people who've burnt out because they've, you know, been in the recording studio for months at a time, and, you know, or been on the road with their tours or whatever, or, you know, artists who just work and then fall in a heap at the end of a week. And my journey was, I worked in government. I worked for corrections for 8.5 years, and I had big portfolios that stretched up and down the country, and I travelled a lot for work. And at the same time, I was a stepmom to 4 kids, had a partner, and in my not so lucid moments decided to try and do my master's. Something eventually had to give, and it was my health. And I had to make some really hard choices in my mid-40s about how I lived my life, and what was important. And, you know, when you lose an aspect of your health, it kind of really makes you stop and pause and reconsider. So that is one of the challenges, even if you get really organised as someone with ADHD, is to find that balance in your everyday life, and then stretch that out to, you know, planning downtime, you know, active downtime, or dedicated downtime.
Yes, absolutely. So that would be a top tip, really. That you
totally, yeah,
and
yeah.
I find that I actually have to use an alarm.
Yep.
For a timer.
Or about structuring our day. So, you know, I now work for myself, which has its pluses and minuses. The pluses is I'm not accountable to anyone except my clients. The minuses is I don't always stop
24/7.
Yeah, well, I've never actually worked 24/7, but I can work some bizarre hours. And I don't have the, you know, everyone's going home signal in my environment to tell me to pack up and go home. So it's about then structuring your life. So, and with building those practices in. So there's the Davis tools, which we've kind of briefly talked about, but practicing those, but also practicing a lot of practical life things. So I practice meditation, I practice yoga, I have a dog, so she and I get walked on a regular basis. There's a breakdown for me if I have a day that I haven't either done yoga or gone for a walk or both. And I am fortunate to live where I am that I can do those things, and not everyone has got all that abundance, you know, in nature and everything. But those are sort of really important touchstones for me, for my well-being, and also quality food and water, all the sort of basics, but they're really important because that's your foundation. And if any of those are
really,
pardon,
there's nothing else but you in the end.
Yeah. And if our health deteriorates, either our mental health or our emotional health or our physical health deteriorates to a point where we can't really look after ourselves very well, then that adds to the issues of disorientation. So some of the triggers for disorientation can be, and these are the things I do check-ins with my clients with, is how did you sleep? They get a bit tired. I ask them every day, how did you sleep? Have you had breakfast?
Have you had breakfast?
Have you had water? And they're like, Rachel. And I go, those are the essentials for your brain to function well. And ADHD is a function of, first and foremost, your brain. And so if your brain is not rested and nourished and looked after, then it's hard to then do much with it that's really productive. I have sent clients home who are underslept. You know, they'd be sitting at the table,
pushing the proverbial uphill, then
nodding off. I'd go home, because you know, after a couple of conversations and they were still really tired, it's like And so when did you get to bed? Oh, 2 a.m. There's a young 18-year-old computer programmer. He'd just be up. That was his standard. Work till 2 a.m., fall asleep, and then couldn't get to class because he was also at uni. He couldn't get to class by noon. So that was why he was with me, was to really look at a reset of his lifestyle, because he said it works for me. I go, yeah, but you're missing your classes. That's not working.
Or does it work for you?
That doesn't really work. We had this big one. He's very, very, very bright. This is the beauty of working with people with ADHD. They're very intelligent, and they can kind of talk you into all sorts of different logic patterns. And he had this whole logic pattern worked out, that he was more productive at 2 a.m. than he was at 10 a.m. I go, that's only because you haven't slept enough at 10 a.m.
The problem is too, is that nobody else is productive at 2 a.m. So
yeah,
you're
and I said to him, and I said to his family, you know, because part of the issue was he wasn't engaging with his family because he was in his computer cave most of the time, or asleep when they were up and about. And but also he wanted a career. He's very good with computers. He wants a career in that industry. I said, that industry is famous for working people really, really, really hard, paying them really well, but working them really hard and making it compelling to stay at work. They even put in pool tables and games and beds in the corner and bean bags. And so they get their fair pound of flesh out of you. And then people burn out. And then they walk away from a promising career, burnt out, and then what? You know, and I came very close to that myself, and I was not in the tech sector and I wasn't getting paid squillions to do it. But I can see that pattern with young people now who are particularly talented. And if they don't learn to manage themselves and their well-being, then they're on a path to that burnout at an early age. And it's hard to come back from a burnout in your life. Really hard.
So, I mean, even if we bring that to a young person, a primary school child, that we don't associate burnout with that age. But the fact of the matter is, the disorientations that happen all day, every day in a classroom because of all the input actually does lead to burnout. And burnout is manifested in behavior.
Yes. Yeah. And we've talked about this a lot, you and I, over the last few years, but there's certainly I'm seeing an increase in young people with what I call self-regulation and co-regulation issues. So behavioral issues. So, you know, kids who are bright, but are often disruptive in a classroom because they're either not getting the attention they want, or they're diverting attention from what they're not doing that they should be doing, or they're struggling with their learning in some way. And so that gets expressed and their frustration in not being able to learn productively often gets expressed as frustration, anger, annoying somebody else, talking back, all of those disruptive behaviors, or to the point of where it comes down to a fight, and they end up using their hands and their feet instead of their words. And so you get kids getting stood down at the age of 8, 9, and 10 for these behavior issues. And I've come from an environment, having worked at corrections, of seeing the sharp end of where that leads. Yeah. And I'm not saying that every child with ADHD has got that path, but if they don't learn productive ways to manage that energy, and they often have very high energy, often very excitable energy, if they don't learn how to manage that well, and they also don't learn how to moderate their response to things. So, and that comes back with being able to orientate themselves and actually look at what's really happening in the situation and be able to step away. So I had a young lad I worked with last year, and he was acknowledged at his soccer graduation at the end of the year for not only being a good player, and he's a very good player, but having learned how to walk away from arguments on the field and not engage with fights. And that was a big step forward for him, because he was getting himself in trouble for seeming to initiate conflicts and things. Now, he always had a good explanation as to why he was doing that, but but he learned to be able.
An external explanation.
Yeah, there's always
it's
that person. Yeah. But it's what I'm interested in. Yeah, is the young person learning to take responsibility for their own emotions and their own feelings in the moment, whether the situation is just or not, or right or wrong. At the end of the day, it's their behaviour that's on view, and what people will remember. They won't remember whether the situation was fair or just or not. They'll remember whether the person had a meltdown, threw their toys, threw their fists, whatever. And that's what gets people labelled and then known as a disruptive student or a bad egg or something like that. And those
it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it?
Yeah, and it tends to follow them through their education and out into life, and it's not correct about them, like there's not a child I've worked with that isn't a good kid, but they've developed behaviours that make them not look like a good kid. And so people then become wary. I had one of my first clients, he's both dyspraxic and had ADHD, and he had no awareness of where his body was in the world. And he'd fling his arms around, and I've had this experience myself, he'd fling his arms around and his legs around and end up hitting his friends. And they're like, "Oi, why did you hit me?" And he went, "I didn't mean to, I didn't hit you." But he had no real sense of control of it. And so when we addressed the source of that and gave him the tools to be able to control where his body was and control his attention, he suddenly could engage again in games in school. And his friends wanted to play with him because he was basically a good kid. But they got tired of being hit.
Yeah, he was using his body to try and orientate himself.
He was doing all of this.
But that's what we do. We're always seeking orientation.
Yes. Life is, you could, another way of.
Like everything, and that's a life thing. It's not just
it's nature. Like nature is always trying to seek equilibrium, right, or a sense of homeostasis, and so our perceptions are always doing that to us. So I've had people in my life who've had head injuries, and they often experience vertigo and nausea and vomiting. And what it is with a head injury, there's a disequilibrium that's happened in their brain, and so their perceptions are trying to correct something, and so it throws something else out, like their balance or their what's driving vertigo, and so then they have those symptoms. But it's the same as my first explanation was, when you come off a merry-go-round, you're disoriented, or you're in disequilibrium, and so your body's just trying to right this all up by throwing that sense out and that sense out until it comes correct. And effectively, that is what we're doing with the Davis tools, is we're seeking that equilibrium of all the perceptions, or alignment of all of the perceptions, so that you can accurately engage with the real world.
Absolutely. So what my experience with Davis, and I have been a meditator for very many years, and I just took to the tools like that. And the facilitator who was working with me said that my experience meditating made it exceptionally easier. just really easier for her to actually teach me,
Yes.
because I was obviously doing it anyway, but without realizing that's what I was doing.
Mm.
I came to the conclusion that actually what the tools do is bring you into the present moment,
Yes.
which
Yes.
is exactly what you're doing when you're meditating. You know,
Yes. Yeah.
you're coming into the present moment. You're in this moment fully. You're seeing what is not what you think is. You're not being taken into the future or the past or anything.
Yes.
You're here now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what Davis tools do.
Yes.
And they very successfully do that for children without them even realizing that that's what's happening.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about what are some things that we could share that would make a difference, particularly for parents with, you know, children who might have ADHD or have ADHD traits. And, you know, there's a few things that I think make a real difference. One is trying to maintain a calm home environment, a calm and ordered home environment. And that's not always easy. I mean, I was a stepmom for 10 years with 4 kids plus all the ring-ins coming and going, neighbours' friends and neighbours' kids and all that sort of stuff. So it's a challenge, but the calmer the environment, the easier it is for someone with ADHD to relax in that environment and function. I think acknowledging that when they come home and have a meltdown, it's often because they've been at school and they've been trying to hold it together in school. And then they get to a safe space, which is your home, and it's like it can all just come out. They don't have to pretend to be a certain way, or, you know, and they feel safe to. And so rather than having that be a wrong thing or a bad thing, or it's just like accepting that it's a space that they feel safe to be able to be fully expressed. It might not always be appropriate, but it's that. And if you can listen for long enough and get to like what is it that happened, then that can be really, really helpful. The other thing is, I think all of what we've talked about before, the self-care, so good sleep.
Make sure they're fed, watered.
Yep. And lights out at a certain time. And that is challenging. I mean, when I was a stepmom, we had to turn the internet off at 10 o'clock at night because we'd find kids under the blankets with their phones or their iPads or whatever. And so
staying calm was much easier before I had teenagers.
Yes, no, I get you.
Totally get you, Lucy.
Totally.
And actually, I think, you know, being a mum of neurodivergent kids with a good dose of ADHD, both of them, who have now just, actually my daughter's 19, so she hasn't quite left her teen years, but honestly, they reflect your inner state. So you know, staying calm is for you more than it is for them.
Yeah. Well, it's a gift to yourself, and then it's a gift to others as well.
Yeah. So
I think the other thing is, as much as possible, encouraging young people to keep their belongings orderly. Again, and I used to resist this myself. I was one of the most untidiest persons for a long time. You know, but having worked with the Davis tools and practices and principles, helping people have a place for their belongings and helping them put them regularly back in that place, and having them have choice in that matter. Like, how do you want your possessions organized, you know, in your room and clothing and things like that? It sounds really basic, but when I know when my laundry's come in and it's been through the drying cupboard and I folded it up and put it away, somehow the rest of my life works a whole lot better. And
you know, I think that's a really good point, Rachel, because we've also got to remember that a lot of our ADHD kids or neurodivergent kids, and my son's nearly 22, and this is a challenge for him too, still,
Yes.
is they actually just can't keep their room tidy. He said to me, "I can't do it, Mum. I don't even know where to start." So but it doesn't help if I tidy it up, because within a week it's back to the state it was at the beginning.
Well, the thing is that, and I don't know if it's particularly a case with neurodivergent people, but we do have this whole thing about control, and we like to be able to create our own environments and our own spaces. I've moved house twice in the last 12 months, and it was disturbing enough for me to move, but then people came and helped me move. And I was like, don't touch my things. Where do you want things? I don't know. Just put them all in the garage and I'll sort it out when you've all gone home. I had great difficulty.
I know that feeling.
Yeah, and so I think it's very much the same for our young people, is giving them some agency and control over where their things are and how they organize them, but also giving them some, I guess, expectations that, you know, an ordered space is actually going to work better for them. And I worked with a 12-year-old this time last year, and she's a very creative, artistic young girl. And her bedroom, I walked in, part of the work I do is work with people in their environments. And I walked in and I went, oh gosh, I'm going to be here 2 days. And her bedroom was just this chaos of all these little collections of things, her artwork, her art materials, 3 years worth of outgrown clothes, things piled up everywhere. Like, I don't know how she slept. And we got through it, and her room became ordered. And there was quite a lot of work to get through it, but she got through it. And in the end, I said, what do you notice? And she said, well, up until today, my room was just somewhere that I stored my stuff, she used another word, and I slept, and that was it. And now it's actually my room.
Yes.
And I get that I'm responsible for keeping it a particular way. And she said, and I've got all this, she'd finally displayed all her art all around the bedroom walls. It was beautiful work, but she'd never got to the stage of even being able to do that because there was this chaos everywhere in her room. And, you know, she's off, she's gone to high school this year, and she's in the talented stream in her school, and talented and gifted stream, and getting her artistic abilities really recognised. And I think that her process of, and it is a process of learning to order your life. And that's one of the things that...
Orientated. I mean, because it's...
Well, yes, but it's also that whole thing of learning about sequencing things and creating order. And those are lessons that are often missed when you have a neurodivergent brain, and particularly ADHD, is because if you're disoriented when that lesson was happening in life, you missed it.
Yeah, you know, and like Lucy said, you know, she's got one ADHD teenager who's OCD, which actually is a blessing, like she says.
Yes.
You know, and the other one is a completely different story.
Yeah.
So, you know, quite often the OCD comes because of this absolute need to orientate, and that becomes a behavior that helps them become oriented, you know, that absolute...
Well, it's the control. When you live in a world as a neurodivergent person where everything is changing all the time, and it occurs like you can't control anything, and things are happening to you and coming at you, and it's a very uncertain world. And a lot of the work I do is about helping people have certainty. Right? So if you put a possession on a particular shelf in your room and you allocate it that place, this is your place, this is your position, and hopefully no one comes in and moves it, you are creating that order in that space. And so you're creating certainty, right? And so what a lot of us are really interested in is how to create certainty. Now, I can't create certainty with the big world, but we certainly can create certainty with our environments, the way we choose to work, the way we operate our personal lives. And that is such a great foundation and platform to be able to do great things. You know, I've gone from a very disorganized and uncoordinated human. I now run live events for hundreds and hundreds of people on Zoom. The first time I did it, I nearly had a heart attack. 300 people on Zoom and didn't have anything set up and no links and no this, and it was just terrifying. And I literally, it was like this adrenaline rush every Saturday night for about a year. And then I actually got really competent at it, and now I train people to do that. But looking back, if I thought about it from the perspective of being dyspraxic and disorganized, I would never have done that. But I've now developed mastery in those areas, and I can now not quite multitask and do something else while I'm running an event, but I can be a lot freer with it because I have my attention in the places it needs to be instead of in this mass panic about how to manage it all. So, you know, and it's just those daily practices really. And when I'm looking at a new thing, I'm going, okay, what's the structure, or what's the order, what's the sequence I need to bring to this so that it flows well and works well for others as well. You know, it's not just about working it for me, but
to the present moment, you know, and from there you can plan where you're going to go next, what you need to do next. But if you're all over the place, a prime example is my battle at the moment with Zoom.
Yes.
And I've been working with the technicians around my page just slipped off the list one day from nowhere. And I keep getting these emails saying, do this, do the next thing. And they don't make sense to me at all, because they say, go here, and I go here and I still can't find what the heck they want me to find. And the more I found that I would, from that first instruction that just went awry, I got more and more disorientated, more and more frustrated, and less able to do anything.
Yeah.
And at the end, I had to walk away.
Yes.
Because I was swearing and was going to write really nasty emails. But when I came back and reorientated myself, is that a word?
Yes, completely. It's a word. Yeah.
And I read the email. It started to make a little bit of sense. Anyway,
yes. Yeah.
Like I could find certain things that I couldn't find before. Not that has helped, but it's a really good example of thinking that you're incapable of doing something, and then once you've centered yourself again and you're back in the present moment, going back and oh well, actually I understand it now, I can see it now.
Yeah.
You know.
So it's such a great example, Kelly. I think there's a whole topic on what I call tech disorientation. It's the thing that disorientates me the most these days. You know, it used to be driving and doing things in the physical realm, and traveling. I'm famous for having walked into a glass wall at Hamilton Airport because I was so tired from traveling and so disoriented and rushing all the time.
I do that sort of thing all the time.
Yeah, and my colleague was with me and they go, are you right? Are you okay? And I said, yep, I'm fine. But yeah, just particularly as someone running your own business and you don't necessarily have a help desk. I used to work for large organizations and you'd ring help and go, oh, I can't do blah, blah, blah. And they go, it's all good, breathe, we'll sort it out. And
Yes.
I don't have one of those help desks anymore. So yeah, it is a huge area, and like yourself, there's days that I've had to go, okay, this is time to go walk the dog and come back and reassess, is this worth having a tantrum over, or is there a way through this apparent mess?
Yes.
And I've just gone through a process of moving my website from one hosting organization to another, and increased its performance from 36% to 86%, plus some work done in the background on it. But there is hope at the end of those tech tunnels of better performance of our assets and our gear and
Yes.
platforms and things. And there's also a certain satisfaction when it does get sorted, that we've developed a new competence, and perhaps a new capacity to deal with the frustration and the uncertainty. But I guess it's a great example. If we're feeling that when we're having a tech disorientation, that is exactly what our kids are feeling when they're trying to navigate some situation in class or a social, ADHD also shows up in a lot of social interactions. So trying to solve a really complex friend situation, or, avoid a fight with somebody, or that they have that same, I call it that inner rage going on.
Yeah, but they have less ability to control it.
Yeah.
So,
well, they haven't learned tools,
Yeah, well, that's what I was about to say. I think what if anybody takes anything out of this live, it's that behavior. It isn't an excuse. It isn't an excuse.
No.
And nobody should, no child or adult or anybody should make it an excuse for their behavior, but it is an explanation. And actually, for neurodivergent and particularly ADHD kids, we actually have to teach them tools for them to be able to orientate themselves and lead a better life.
Yeah.
Be able to self-regulate and co-regulate and do all the things. But what it actually comes down to at the sort of the bottom line is the ability to bring themselves back to the present moment, to re-establish their inner calm, their ability to see the world as it is, not how they think it is.
Yes, and I'm reminded, and it's got nothing to do with Davis really. Many years ago, I studied briefly with a transcendental meditation teacher. I kind of regret I didn't keep going, but she was wonderful, and she had spent time. That's when I lived in Melbourne. She had spent time in Cambodia teaching the orphans from the genocide there how to meditate. And she said you'd walk in and the class would just be totally chaos and they're jumping all over the place. And then they would have their half hour of transcendental meditation practice and everything would just go back to calm. And then they'd go on with their day. And their practice was, and she believed that it made a huge difference to their capacity to learn and focus and have a productive life after such trauma that they'd all been part of and witnessed. Yeah.
So actually Lucy's got a good point there, but to illustrate what you were talking about, I was in charge of I wouldn't like to say a unit, but a learning program in Rotorua, Gangland Rotorua, for the lowest 5% of the intake of an intermediate school. So all these students had to be 2 years at least below their chronological age. and all of them were neurodivergent, all of them.
Yes. Yes.
And they had all of them came with the behaviors that they came. Avoidance behaviors, aggression, you know, all those things. But one of the strongest components of our program was a meditation component.
Yeah.
And the benefits of that became really obvious to me when like I would forget, I'd walk in and I'd be like, in my ADHD way, hyperfocus, right, we need to do this. And they'd go, whoa, we haven't meditated yet.
Wow. Isn't that cool?
We're not doing anything until we've done our meditation. I was like,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what you want, isn't it?
Well, because they can feel the difference.
Yes.
And I know from my time working in prisons, you know, the meditation classes, the wonderful people who would come in and teach meditation classes were very, very popular amongst, you know, incarcerated people. So it makes a huge difference. I've just,
yeah. So
I just put something in the chat, but it's for everybody. How do we educate? How do we educate our educators? How do we educate our schools about neurodivergent students? And there's a couple of really great books I recommend you carry under your arms, or you listen to, or you read, or you go and take to the principal or to a teacher. One is called The Gift of Dyslexia, which is Ron Davis's first book.
Yes.
And the other one is called The Gift of Learning. It's not so well known, but it covers ADHD as well as maths issues and handwriting issues, interestingly. Yeah. And the gift of learning is amazing. Yeah. And I knew nothing. Yeah, I knew nothing about ADHD when I started doing my training, and this was kind of a part of our training was to read the book. And I just listened to it over and over and over again, and I started to see my whole life in that book. And I think it's a really valuable resource for parents and for teachers. And
so
I think
for those who are listening to the recording, Lucy has said that you know, well, I'll read it. It said, when you talk about it not being an excuse, I agree with this, but I'm finding I'm having to defend my son for a lot of minor things at school because the teachers blanket teach the kids. And yes, Lucy, I totally, look, I've been in the classroom for over 30 years. And but I'm actually one of those teachers that didn't blanket teach, very unconventional in the way I approach teaching and learning. And I get your frustrations because yes, there's a lot of misinformation out there, but on top of that, it's not the teacher's fault. I can tell you that it's got a lot to do with systemic issues, you know. That teacher in the classroom is often disorientating. And because of stress, because of pressure, because of all the issues of compliance and control. You see, not every teacher is like me that would deliberately, I just nod my head and then do what I wanted to do in the classroom, what I felt was best for those kids. And to boot, there's little to no training around this. Teacher training is woefully inadequate when it comes to actually to teaching and learning, full stop, honestly. And so, yeah, you know, when you're stressed, it's those silly little behaviors that you start picking up on because those are the things that are stressing you out even more. And then you're on top of that kid, and that stresses him out or her out, and the behavior gets worse, and it's just a downward spiral. can that be fixed?
Mm.
I don't know. It certainly can't be fixed overnight. And
No, but I think there are, Davis has done a lot of work and research around taking their core strategies from the individual programs and putting them into a program called the Davis Learning Strategies. And whilst they're focused particularly around helping young people with dyslexia, those same tools are really relevant for ADHD as well. And there's been some really great research done in New Zealand by a principal called Jane Severinson from Waiahu Downs School in, I think, North Otago.
yeah.
I think she's moved schools now, but she did 6 months of action research. She had the Davis Learning Strategy. She had her early her new entrant teachers, year 1 to 4, do the training, and then at the same time those trainings were rolled out around a number of schools in the country, and she went around and visited each school and did some action research to validate what difference had been made with the students. And the very first thing that showed up was more kids were coming to school, so the attendance went up, if you like, or the truancy went down. The next thing was the behaviour issues went down. So the number of kids who were being sent to the principal's office or were being stood down from school or on disciplinary charges and things dropped dramatically. So those two things happened first. So the participation and behaviour issues altered dramatically. And then the reading improved across the school, not just with the dyslexic kids, but all the learners in those classes. But I was really interested, given my background working in corrections, I was interested in the behavioural changes amongst the kids. So they get taught those core Davis tools around being focused or being oriented, how to manage their energy themselves. So a lot of teachers will put up a little dial in the classroom, and the kids had to come in and indicate where they felt they were on that dial before they settled down. So coming in from playtime or lunch, and they dial down to an appropriate level for learning, and it really made a huge difference. And I'm a massive advocate for these tools being taught to all new entrant teachers and even like kindergarten teachers, so that it's a foundation for learning. And then on top, you can layer in all the other different methodologies. But that foundation, managing your energy.
Really easy tools to teach.
Oh, they're dead easy.
Simple.
Yeah.
And they're so effective. They're incredibly effective. Their simplicity does not reflect the profundity of them. Yeah.
They're very, very powerful. And, in countries who are less resourced. So there's an example in India. So there's only a couple of schools in all of India, so billions of people, for learning challenged kids with learning differences, only a couple. And one of them has the Davis Learning Strategies embedded in their curriculum. And it's the only way to address masses of kids with these learning difficulties. If they were left in a regular school, they would not get the attention that they need as a neurodivergent learner. So they're in these really big schools, and they have facilitators, Davis facilitators in those schools, working with the teachers to upskill them in these Davis learning strategies. And the whole school has shifted how they're addressing those and supporting those neurodivergent learners.
Yes, and again, before we've had a really fantastic Jason around this, and we could talk all day and all night about
we could.
That's our passion, isn't it, Rachel?
Yes, it is.
But the other thing that we also need to make clear again is that it's not either or. Again,
no.
It's not like you have to stop everything else and just do Davis learning strategy. It's not that at all. It's just not just. It's profoundly it makes a profound difference.
Yes.
You use the learning strategies as part of
Your everyday classroom activity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not just this or this. There's no. It's not a one. It's not a one thing fits everything. So to speak. And that's what I think people have got to get their heads around, because we've kind of been pigeonholed as practitioners, as teachers in school, to thinking that not most of us know that this isn't true, but we've got to all do it this way because this way works for everyone. Oh no, hang on, no, this way doesn't work for everyone. We've got to all do it that way, you know, and that's a systemic thing. That's
Yes.
a systemic thing.
Yeah.
I think as teachers, as practitioners, we have an obligation really to start looking at how we can change our program to fit the children that we're with.
Yeah.
But Davis is definitely a very sort of a UDL concept, you know, universal design for learning.
Yeah.
It works for all kids. It works exceptionally well for dyslexic kids, but it works for everyone. Like you said, you know, everybody's results went up. All the attendance went up. Wasn't just the neurodiverse kids.
No.
So,
no. And I think there's a whole conversation in there about, you know, which came first, the neurodivergent brain or the reading brain. And there's a great YouTube out there, I'm trying to remember why her name. She's just beautiful. And she talks about how actually our ancient brain was wired for neurodiversity for survival. You know, if you're out in the savannah hunting, or being hunted, you need that peripheral vision. You need to be able to listen to the sounds in the grass and know what that means and to perceive
and
hyper-focused when you're hunting and all of those skills, which I wish I could remember her name, Lucy, but if you Google the reading brain, I might do that while we're on here actually, because she's just a marvelous
I can do that.
reading brain.
It all makes sense though, really. You know, when you sit down and you put all your biases aside and you actually listen, a lot the Davis techniques work at a fundamental level. It's not just peripheral. It's very much a way of being, actually, rather than a way of doing.
Totally.
Yeah.
What I will do, because I can't find it, is I'll send the link to you, Kelly, and when you post the recording, we'll put it underneath.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
But
it's extraordinary because
what was the link, the title again?
It's called The Reading. It's a YouTube video called The Reading Brain. But Marianne, I know her first name now, Marianne Wolf. There we go. I keep looking inside my brain, I'll find out. Marianne Wolf, The Reading Brain. And it's just a really fabulous, she's such an advocate for reading and helping people read well and acknowledging that actually the reading brain is a fairly new innovation for humans. Actually our ancient brain is the really powerful one, and the reading brain is kind of this new layer.
Well, it is. It's very new. It's not even 100 years old, really, for many
many societies.
Exactly.
Yeah, and for us to be so pernickety, if you like, about people being able to read well, it just doesn't fit with the whole of our evolution as humans. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, that's
Yes.
very funny, Lucy. Lucy says we took our son to an escape room. He had us out of that room so quickly, but you put him in a classroom.
Yeah.
That's so much like me. I'm terrible to put in an escape room because we're out within like 5-10 minutes, and you've paid a whole lot of money for that.
Mm. Yeah.
But that's how my brain works, and that's
Yes.
how obviously how your son's brain works, Lucy.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it's now 9:30, and we've been talking for quite some time, and I'd like to thank you, Joanne, Lucy, and Lynette, who came on earlier. Lynette's actually out on the she's in her caravan, so she's probably run out of internet. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you coming and joining us. If there's any questions, are there any questions that we can answer quickly for anyone? No, doesn't look like it. So we'll say thank you very, very much, and Rachel will be back in maybe a week's time, Rachel, and maybe we can talk about the tech issues and
Yes.
things around neurodivergence.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. No, we have another very productive conversation.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you to our guests who were here tonight and for your attention at this late time. It's really awesome, and I hope that was yeah, a good point, Lucy. We can talk a bit about managing anxiety and how that's a big issue for people who are neurodiverse. And yeah, yeah,
Awesome.
brilliant.
And if anybody has any other ideas, please feel free to put them down in the comments or to email me. You can contact the Occupation through our website and our Facebook page. Thank you, everyone. Lovely to see you here.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you.